I was naturally able to pick things up physically and just execute those things, right? And we kind of went into spring break, so all I did was just train.
That's a pretty significant example of some great sportsmanship.
Can I accomplish that, right? So it's a challenge. He can't even stand up, and now we're going to accomplish this mission. Our first PT test, no one in the company physically was better than me, right? When we started shooting, no one was shooting better than me. I don't view achievements and I'm satisfied with them. To me, it's just something that I had to accomplish. The last thing my wife told me was kick ass. It's not even a goal, it's a task, right? I have to do it. There is nothing like Ranger Battalion. There is nothing how disciplined and how successful they are at executing mission sets. You kind of start to realize, what life is like here.
This is exactly what this podcast is about.
It's controlled chaos inside, right? This is so intense. We have to move.
Is that something that is you're born with, or is that something that you can learn?
It was the most impactful thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. There's not one day that I don't think about it.
On this episode of Boundary Breakers, we sit down with Raul Romero. Raul was one of the best high school track athletes in the country out of Arizona. Went to college to run track, and when a devastating injury ended his track career, enlisted in the U.S. Army hoping to become an Army Ranger. He enlisted without a Ranger contract, which was a huge risk, but fulfilled his dream, became a Ranger, deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, and alongside the most elite Special Forces units in the country, and has an unbelievable story. I really think you're going to enjoy this episode. Boundary Breakers is brought to you by Carter & Clark. And so what I'd love to do, if it's all right with you, is I'd love to just start, a couple minutes with your background. And then if you're willing to share some of your experience as a Ranger and, some of the lessons learned there, and then just some overall leadership lessons you may have learned while, your time in service, and then just talk about your transitioning into business a little bit. And, if you had challenges or what have you during that, and then maybe just a couple of miscellaneous questions, and then we can wrap it up. Does that work?
That works. Yep.
Awesome. Well, look, I think it's important just for the folks watching or listening, just to make sure that they sort of get to know who we're talking to, myself included. So if you don't mind, can you just give us a few minutes on your background, sort of where you grew up? What your childhood was like a little bit?
Yeah, so I grew up in Nogales, Arizona. It's a border town in southern Arizona. It's a pretty small town, but its main industry down there is a produce industry. So a lot of what we eat as far as fruits and vegetables comes from Mexico. So probably back in the 50s or 60s, families started to develop that business in partnership with growers in Mexico. And my grandfather was one of those pioneers down there that really blew up that industry. That's funny. I did a senior project when I was in high school on the produce industry in Nogales, and super small town, right? And this was back in the early 2000s. And when I did the senior project, the revenue coming out of the produce industry was $3.2 billion. So even though it's a small town, it's a pretty, or it was somewhat of a wealthier town because of the families down there.
So 3.2 billion coming out of that particular town.
Yeah, just
for produce.
Yeah, produce coming in from Mexico into the United States, right? So it was mainly produce going to the Midwest and Northwest and the Northeast. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's where I grew up. Go ahead.
I'm just curious. So is it mainly in sort of the importation and transportation and logistics of the produce?
Yeah. So
The
I hope no one's in produce watching and they're going to tell me that I'm completely wrong, but
no,
but
no, 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 no.
but um, I never worked in the industry, even though my family all still does. So basically, these companies will sell to Safeway, to all these large grocery chain stores, right? And that grocery chain store is going to want a quota, right? I need this many tomatoes a year, right?
Yeah.
So that distributor in Nogales partners with a grower in Mexico in order to be able to provide that quantity. So they'll truck it from Mexico into Nogales, and then from Nogales, that's where they repackage it, and it's all it's pretty advanced as how they categorize how the grade of the product and what's going to go to market and what's not. And in Nogales, so they repackage it and they ship it off to its destination.
Okay, gotcha. So it's the big distribution point for all the produce coming out of Mexico. Okay, that's interesting. So you grew up there. I guess normal childhood. What inspired you to get into the military?
So I grew up really, really active into sports. I started playing soccer, when I was 4 or 5 years old. And Nogales had a really good reputation of its soccer teams coming out of there. So I played soccer till I got into high school. And then growing up playing soccer, we would travel to California. We would travel to different states and play these tournaments. So from a young age, I was always my dad really instilled to me hard work ethic. So that's kind of where I started to notice. This might sound a little cocky, but that's when I started to notice my physical ability. I was naturally able to pick things up physically and just execute those things, right? And then in high school, I kind of went away from soccer and I transitioned into football and track. I think I just did football just because, well, one, I was fast, so, but also because it's high school football, right? But it wasn't necessarily what I really enjoyed. I guess I enjoyed just, it's a small town and it's a football team. Yeah, exactly. My passion then became track. And that's where I really excelled in high school. For my junior year, I had a pretty catastrophic injury my senior year, right before state, but I never lost the race in the 400 meters or the 200 meters, right? I was pretty gifted and blessed with that ability. And that's where also, aside from practicing with the track team, my dad would practice extra with me, right? So if the track team was doing something, I was doing that and more, right? So that's kind of really where I developed a work ethic, that kind of carried me into junior college. I ran track in junior college, but I suffered a hamstring injury my senior year in track, and because of my reluctantness to let that heal properly, I just allowed it to heal enough for me to return. And long-term wise, that wasn't a good decision. But when you're 18, 19 years old, you know, you don't care about the future, you care about the now, right? So
yep, hard to see past
exactly.
Friday when you're that age, right?
In college, it was really hard to finish a indoor season or outdoor season because the same injury, which was a torn hamstring, would just, you know, it never healed correctly. And I was a sprinter, and at that age, your muscles are kind of still developing, and you're putting them through a lot of stress. So the scar tissue never healed correctly, and I was just not able to compete in that sport again. And really, that was the only purpose why I was going to college, was just to
compete.
To compete. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. So did you injure it while you were running track, or were you doing something else?
No, it's funny.
Like at practice?
Yeah, it's funny because I was a senior in high school, and this other kid from this other school, him and I would trade off fastest times in the state that year. And then he had just posted the fastest time. I had it prior, and then he had just posted the fastest time. And we kind of went into spring break. So all I did was just train. I mean, right? I wouldn't go out. Like my social life was during football, I had a social life. After football, no social life, right? And my girlfriend in high school hated that. But it was all about, it was all about, well, I need to win, right? So I went into the next race after he had overtaken the fastest time in the state that year in the 400. And I felt incredibly, I felt incredible going into that race. I probably the best that I had ever felt. And the race started, and I just felt incredible. And coming off of that first turn, I just felt the ball go from my lower hamstring up to my glutes, and then I just heard a loud pop. And so that was the first time.
First turn.
Yeah, It was the first turn. In the first turn in the 400, there's a staggered start. I had already made up 2 positions within that staggered start, so I knew I was, and I had coaches at different turns.
You were smoking.
I had coaches at different turns that they were that they were telling me my splits for each 100 meters, right? Because I knew I need to be here at 200. I need to be here at 300, right? Like I need to be here at 100 if I want to, if I want to beat this guy. So I had coaches at different turns, that were ready to clock my splits. But so that was the first time. And after that, I kind of never healed correctly. And it's funny because I had qualified automatically for state because of the year prior. So I thought, I'm ready to go. And it stayed right off of the blocks. I tore it again. And the guy that him and I were going back and forth that year, he ended up winning state. And when I got hurt, he's the one that went to go get me off the blocks. And so even though we were competitors, there was definitely a mutual respect, there.
That's a lot of that. That's a pretty significant example of some great sportsmanship.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because it's having crosstown rivals or cross-state rivals, or when you're that maniacally focused on something, and it sounds like you just ate and breathed and slept, wanting to win, wanting to beat this guy. I think that speaks a lot about both of you, frankly. If you were a jerk, I doubt that guy would be coming to want to help you up. So I'm sure that you guys, there was a healthy respect back and forth.
And it was a cross-state rival because we would, he was up north and he was more in the Phoenix area, and I was down south. So we would never we would never see each other until regionals or states, right? But I mean, we obviously knew who each other were, especially that year, especially our senior year.
No, that's a really interesting story. So, I mean, I certainly don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you were extraordinarily driven, at least in your high school, young adult age or young adult years, you were very focused and very driven, but also gifted athletically.
Yeah,
clearly.
Yeah. Enough to the point where, I mean, I could see lessons in it, right? That became, once track season started, both my junior and senior year, that kind of became everything, right? Nothing else, nothing else mattered. So
when you tore, I didn't mean to interrupt you. When you tore your hamstring the first time, was that your junior year?
No,
or
it was my
year?
senior year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but my junior year is when. I mean, I started to do really well my sophomore year, but I was still kind of young. But then, I made it to state my sophomore year and everything. But once my senior year came, my junior year, that's when, that's when I was, top 5 in the state.
You kind of blossomed, and you got you started getting the attention and the accolades and things.
Yeah. So,
well, it's it's interesting, and the folks that I talk to, a lot of the best and most impactful lessons in life come from what seems to be a negative, right, or sometimes a life crushing experience that you're going through at the time. Right.
Oh yeah,
but
I mean, and we'll get into many. Into many of those, man.
Well, I can't wait. I can't wait. But I'm just curious that we could move on from this part. But I do it from what I can tell, this seems to be sort of a pretty impactful, if not watershed event in your life. At least you were headed down the path of athletics, and then it took a little bit of a turn because of something outside of your hands, but. Looking back on that, are there any significant lessons, or are there any sort of thankfulness, or gosh, I'm glad it went this way, or, what's it like looking back on that now?
Yeah. So that's a good question. Obviously when you're that age, there's a lot of negativity around it, right? You don't understand why why at the peak, and then why did it keep on happening in college, right? But looking back at it now, like I said, I became really reliant, and even in college, I became really reliant just on the sport, right? Where I'm a man of faith, and when you start to put something other than God in front of Him, then you're quickly going to be humbled, right? And that's what I learned, right? There's many forms of idolatry, and that's what I learned. At the time, obviously,
that's beautiful.
I didn't know that, right? Or you don't think that way,
right?
But
no, I think that's fantastic, and I think a lot of people, can learn a lot from hearing that. I think you're exactly right. People, when thou shalt have no other gods before me, people think idolizing means you have to go worship at some altar and pretend like something's God. But it really, I think the meaning of that is that what's important in your life, right? Where in the hierarchy of importance are you putting God? Exactly. And if you're putting something above that, that, like you said, you get humbled pretty quickly. But,
exactly. I had that gift, right? But that gift was given to me, right? And I never acknowledged.
Right.
Yeah, and I grew up, we're a very traditional Catholic family. I was an altar server, so I never acknowledged where that gift came from at the time. So, I had to be
Right.
reminded of it.
Yeah. It's interesting how we have to go through those things to learn sometimes. I'm right there with you. Well, so how'd you find your way to the military?
Yeah. So kind of when I kind of knew in college that I wasn't even completing a season anymore. Same injury. I couldn't go because in track in college there's 2 seasons. In the wintertime you do an indoor season, and then in the springtime you do the outdoor season, right? So it's a year-round thing. But I couldn't complete both seasons, and then my sophomore year I said, well, I'm not going to compete indoor. I'm just going to compete outdoor, because maybe indoor and outdoor that's too much competition, too much stress on my body. So I don't really care about indoor. I care more about outdoor. But same thing happened. And so the spring of 2004, as a sophomore in college, that's when Pat Tillman was killed, right? And I grew up a huge Arizona State fan, huge ASU fan. Even though a lot of my uncles and everyone went to, we all went to U of A, everyone was a huge Arizona State fan. My grandfather was even published in the Arizona Republic, like in the 80s, as one of the biggest Arizona. They did a whole article on him as one of the biggest Arizona State fans in the state, right?
Wow.
So
you mean it. You mean it when you say
100%.
that.
100%.
Documented.
Yeah. So when Pat Tillman, was killed, that kind of like made me evaluate, like, what am I doing, right? What can I do? But to be honest, that wasn't a lot of people might say, I want to serve my country and all that stuff. Yeah, that's great. But for me, really, it was, can I do that? Right. For me, it was like, can I accomplish that? Right. So it's a challenge.
Yep.
So that's kind of what led me going into the military. So when I went into the military, I went in at a time where I knew I wanted to be a Ranger. And when I went in, just for that period of time, I guess, there were no Ranger contracts available, right? They call them Option 40 contracts, right? Then they have them available every year, but during the period window that I went through, there was no Option 40, right?
They weren't giving them out.
They weren't giving them out. I don't know why. So I had to now make a decision. Am I going to go in as a regular infantryman and risk, while, throughout training, not being able to be granted that Option 40? So high risk.
Right.
Did not want to be in the regular infantry. Like, that was far from what I wanted to be, right? So I was really struggling. And I remember this captain at MEPS. So MEPS is like your military in-process center and stuff. There was a captain there who saw that I was struggling, that I was, it's that it was a tough decision for me to make. And he just promised me, hey man, if you go in there, and, you do your best in basic training, you could get offered that Option 40 contract. Right.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just I sort of want to make sure everybody sort of understands, the situation that you were facing. for somebody like Raul, who's dead set on going a very specific track in the military, if you don't go in with a contract that guarantees that track, then you're essentially signing up for an enlistment period where you might be, stuck doing something that you absolutely do not want to do. Right. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands the decision that you had to make. You had to go in and sign your life away for that you were going to give the government 4 years, but that you might not be able to do what you were signing up to do.
Yes.
Meaning
you
to go to Ranger school.
You pick your MOS, so you pick your job title, right? Your specialty, and you'll fill that role, but you don't know where, right? It could be with whatever unit, right? So when I enlisted as an 11 Bravo, which is an infantryman, right? So without that Ranger contract, I mean, the only thing that I'm guaranteed is I'm going to be in an infantry unit, right? That's the only thing I'm guaranteed, right? So it was a gamble.
Yeah, so big deal.
Yeah, really big deal. So going into basic training, I knew, I have to be the best at everything, right? And I was.
And where did you go to basic? Did you go to Benning?
Fort Benning, Georgia.
Yeah.
Do not like Fort Benning, Georgia. Did not have.
I don't know many people that do. But I'm sorry, I interrupted. So go ahead. I'm going to be quiet. You need to tell the story.
So I went in and I knew whatever we did, I have to be the best, right? Like, and I did. I mean, our first PT test, no one in the company physically was better than me, right? When we started shooting, no one was shooting better than me, right? So essentially I have to highlight myself. Like I have to make myself known. And I mean, it did happen. It actually happened really quick. The first PT test we did, it wasn't your official Army PT test where you do 2-minute push-ups. We did 1 minute, right? But in that 1 minute, I ended up doing like 72 push-ups, right? So, I quickly, I quickly gained the attention of the battalion commander for my basic training class, and then they did an article on the Bayonet, which is the Fort Benning newspaper, and I was, I was put in it, right? And around week 5, week 4 or 5, I forget what week, but I was called in to one of my drill sergeant's office, and he called me in there, and he asked me, what do I want out of the Army? And I told him that I want to be a Ranger. Like, that's it. So, he tried to tell me about his unit. I think he was in the 101st, but, it went in 1 year and out the other. Did not care, right? So, I think a couple days later, we were at a range, and they called me and this other guy over who ended up going to first Ranger Battalion, and we both. So, if I was, the most physically capable guy in our company, this guy was second, right? And same thing. So sometimes we would kind of go back and forth. So they offered us a Ranger contract. So week awesome. 4 or 5, we earned that contract.
I bet that felt pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, that was, so, a little bit about me is, and I can say it does contribute to the things I was able to accomplish is, I don't view achievements and I'm satisfied with them. To me, it's just something that I had to accomplish, right? I don't go back and recognize it. It's just something I had to do, right? It wasn't like, it's not even a goal, it's a task, right? I have to do it.
Yeah. So you're not one to sit there and
No,
celebrate.
no,
say,
it's something
yippee, look what I
that
did. It's
that
okay. All right. Did that.
yeah,
What's
I
next?
had to do it, right? I had to do it, right?
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha. So any hamstring issues with the in basic with the
no,
PT?
none. No, like I said, the hamstring issues only really happen like once I would get into heavy sprints. That's when,
Okay.
yeah, that's when it would happen.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Awesome. All right. So all right. So I'm invested. This is great. All right. So you got your Ranger contract. Yep. And then, so you finished basic, and then did you go straight to Ranger school and then Ranger selection, or how did that all unfold?
So you go to airborne school, which is, you know, a big Army school. So it's not free fall, it's static line. And then from airborne school, once you're done with that, you get picked up by, I was one of the last classes to go as RIP. So what you would call Ranger selection, RIP was Ranger Indoctrination Program, right? Now it's RASP, right?
Yeah.
Ranger Assessment Program, right? I went through RIP. So, I forget if it's the day of graduation or the day after, I forget. But those that are gonna go to RIP do a formation, and then the Ranger Regiment is up the road from airborne school. So, you know, these Tambourine dudes come down and they pick you up, and you know, parents are watching, and these guys are just whispering nothings in your ear. So then from there,
so that's the beginning.
You know, we started that day with 110 dudes. And you don't necessarily start RIP right away. Maybe some classes do. We didn't. We had, I think, a week or two of RIP hold, and then we start RIP. But during that RIP hold, I mean, dudes are dropping out, right? It's not like you're just on hold and waiting for your turn. No, you're there.
Yeah. No such thing.
No such thing, right? So, so we went through RIP, and we started RIP hold with like 110, and I think we graduated 34 guys out of RIP going into the Ranger battalions. And I knew I wanted to go to 2nd Ranger Battalion because that's where Pat Tillman was at. So I knew I wanted to go to 2nd Ranger Battalion. But it's kind of a gamble how they choose who's going to go to what battalion. You know, I think the class before me, it was a much smaller class that graduated, like 14 guys graduated, and I think they all went to 3rd Ranger Battalion. Mine, they allowed us to pick, but not as individuals. They say, okay, if you want to go to 1st Ranger Battalion, line up, right? So guys line up, but you don't know where they're going to start counting from, right? They only have so many slots, right? So you don't know where they're going to start counting from.
Gosh.
And then they said, okay, who wants to go to 2nd? I mean, no one wants to go to 3rd. Absolutely no one wants to go to 3rd because that's where the flagpole is at, right? And a lot of guys want to go to 2nd because it's the furthest away from the flagpole. So a bunch of dudes got up for 2nd, and I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to get picked. And they started on my side of the formation. So I was picked, and I was able to go to 2nd Ranger Battalion. And I was actually assigned to the same company as Pat Tillman. So at the time when I got there, the guys were deployed because during that time, probably up to a couple of years ago, you're on a constant rotation, right? So when I got there, what's called the rear detachment. So the guys that didn't deploy because they're either going to a school, they're coming back from a school, whatever. But there's a rear detachment element. So I got there, and I get placed in ACO, which is Alpha Company. And initially, the sergeant that was in charge of Alpha, of ACO, he passed away already. But he wanted me to go to his platoon because they did a PT test of the new guys, and I scored the highest. So he wanted me to go to his platoon, which was second platoon, and that was Pat Tillman's platoon. So he was recommending me to go to second platoon, but I ended up going to third platoon, which nothing against second platoon, nothing against first platoon, but my personality would not have fit in first or second platoon.
Gotcha. So just two quick things. I want to make sure that everybody understands. I mean, becoming a Ranger, making it through RIP is an extraordinary. I mean, it's difficult to put into words with just a sentence or two just how challenging it is just to begin with. Look, I mean, we've had SEALs and a couple of guys from the unit, you know, on the show, and so it's in context. But I don't want to pass over your experience without just making sure I explain. Just getting to where just becoming a Ranger in the Ranger Regiment is beyond difficult. Starting without a contract and having a goal to sort of follow in Pat Tillman's footsteps and to actually get into the same battalion, same company, and almost at the same platoon. It's just remarkable. That's borderline impossible what you did. So congrats. And the other thing, just really quickly, that I'm going to forget if I don't say it is, so Pete Blaber, former unit commander, just released a book recently about Pat Tillman, and Pete spoke to a lot of, I mean, he did years worth of research and has an unbelievable account of a lot of that stuff, and I highly recommend it. So
thank you. Yeah, and I mean, fantastic.
You
know, I worked.
But, sorry, go ahead.
You know, I worked with you know, most of my deployments I work with DevNec. You know, the guys, you know, the dev group. But they're you know, but you mentioned the unit, right? So CAG. Most of the dudes from CAG come from Ranger Battalion. So Ranger Battalion is, I mean, there is nothing like Ranger Battalion. There is nothing how disciplined and how successful they are at executing mission sets. No one, I mean, I'm not going to put CAG there. CAG is at their own level, right? But there's a reason why most of their ranks are filled from dudes from Ranger Battalion, because like looking back at it, Ranger Battalion is the hardest place to grow up in. I mean, you're every other unit, once you know, one thing I forgot to mention is, while we were in RIP, we will always be told, if you think it's hard now, wait till you get to Ranger Battalion. And you can't imagine like how, like I'm getting my butt kicked every day, right? You know, we don't get weekends off, right? You know, during selection, you don't get weekends off. So you're getting your butt kicked every day, and you're like, how the hell is it harder in Ranger Battalion than this? A lot of these other special operations units, once you make it, it's like a rite of passage. Not in Ranger Battalion, man.
Right.
In Ranger Battalion, when you're the new guy, it's a hard life, and you have to prove yourself every day. But that's why that unit is so successful, because it's so regimented and so just disciplined in the way it executes things that there is no flaws. Yeah.
You know, it's the top 0.1%. I mean, it's the best of the best in the Army. And my understanding, based on the people, I did not serve and I was not a Ranger, and have extreme and deep respect for all you guys. My understanding from the people that I've spoken to is that it's extraordinarily stressful place to be because of this idea that look like selection never ends. And so, you don't just get in and then you rest. You're constantly being evaluated, and that it's extraordinarily stressful because, guys are kind of cycled out routinely. If you get injured, or if you sort of lose, or you're not going to some school, or you're not improving or becoming a sniper or doing something, they're going to find, a reason to slot in the next guy. And so it's just this constant sort of pressure, situation where you got to be always competing and always, doing your best so that you can, maintain your spot, which has got to be a stressful way to live.
Yeah, it is. And then you kind of start noticing that, on my first deployment. So I deployed within, I forget, 2 months of being in Ranger Battalion. They're we call it the reach back bird. So I deployed and I met my platoon in deployment, right? So that is super intimidating, right? Like, you're meeting these guys.
So they were mid deployment, and so you went out.
Yeah. So
and did a rip or whatever.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's where I met them, right? And super intimidating, because the first month and a half of being in Ranger Battalion, they're teaching you a lot, but at the same time, you're the new guy, so you're getting messed with, right? So you're it's relentless,
hazed.
Right? So then you kind of start to realize what life is like here, right? What type of dudes are here, the environment, and now you're going to go meet these guys on deployment, right? So that's a pretty intimidating factor. But when I met my squad leader, who's now in CAG, that guy is one of the most impactful mans that I've met in my life.
Why is that?
He held himself to a standard that everyone admired. And he wasn't the guy that told you to do something and wasn't going to do it with you, or is just going to do it much better, right? So he modeled the behavior that he expected. So, you want to work for him, right? Because just of how, he's just a badass. Of how good he is, you want to work for him. This guy was the epitome of how a Ranger should perform. Incredible. I saw him do things that we were getting off. It was a daytime hit, and we were coming out of these strikers, and we're working with CAG, and we're running towards our objective. And my squad leader looks, and he's like, "We're running towards the wrong objective." So he just takes off to the right objective. He grabs my team leader. He grabs a charge out of my team leader's back. As we're sprinting to this objective, because it's daytime, we typically don't do daytime stuff. As he's sprinting to his objective, he's prepping that charge. CAG dudes see us. They start following us. And he sets the breach. Breach is in. As soon as he goes in, the CAG dudes catch up to him. We're making our way to the courtyard. These dudes are up on the second story already. That's how, incredible. This guy was just incredible at doing his job. And you wanted to work for him. He didn't need to make you do push-ups. He didn't need to make you do any of that stuff. As long as he told you you messed up, or, I'm disappointed, like that, like, you can make me do push-ups, whatever. I don't care. You can make me do all that. But just for you to say that hurts a lot more because of the respect that we had for him.
Yeah. So I love this, and I love the raw emotion about this guy, because this is exactly what this podcast is about, right? And I was just having a conversation the other day about great leadership, and we were talking about the difference between somebody that motivates out of fear versus a great leader and there's something about those people that you don't want to disappoint them, right? It's like you want them to be proud of you. You want their, you want a nod from them. You want their acceptance. And it sounds like, and it isn't just, typically it's not just because, they're typically really good at what they do and they model great behavior, but it's like in every aspect where, it's impossible to put into words and to explain, but I think the closer we can sort of understand, the more we can understand, identify those types of people, like your squad leader. I think the students of leadership can try to be more like that. And by the way, CAG, in case anybody's listening doesn't understand, that's Delta Force.
Yeah, that was their. So that's their name at inception, right?
That's the combat action. Just maybe folks from outside the military that aren't familiar with with the lingo. I just want to make sure that everyone understands. Everyone has the right context for that last story you told. I mean, that's just amazing stuff. So when you went out and met them on deployment, was that Afghanistan?
No,
or
Iraq? It was Iraq. Yeah.
Okay.
So we were in Iraq, and that's where I met them. And I mean, it was the two team leaders and my squad leader, right? And they obviously, they take you into the room and, they want to be intimidating, and they ask for you've recited the Ranger Creed 1,000 times. They asked for the Ranger Creed and I completely messed it up. Right. So, we call it smoking, right? So they made me do push-ups and all that stuff.
They smoked you?
Yeah, so they smoked me, but that's when the questions that he was asking me started to like click in my mind. Like, this is a different type of guy right here, right? He's asking me questions about me as a person, not about what's the max effective range of an M4, right? Like stuff that when you're in Ranger Battalion, what are the principles of patrolling? Like stuff in Ranger Battalion as a new guy, like you're gonna get asked, and you better know the answer. He wasn't asking me any of those questions, right? He was asking me questions about me. So that's kind of where like I started to get a glimpse of who he was, right? And so as a new guy, if they ask for somebody, you better be the first one up there, right? Like you don't walk anywhere, you'll run everywhere, right? You volunteer yourself, right? So that's what I was doing, right? Anytime he would call for someone, I would go. I would never walk to him. I would always run. And one of my good buddies, he was our saw gunner. He was a tab spec 4, so that means he's a specialist with a Ranger tab, right? So we'd call him tab spec 4. So those guys can smoke you too, right?
Okay.
So he pulled me aside one time and he said, "Hey, he mentioned my squad leader's name. He's like, hey man, he's really impressed in you. Whatever you're doing, just keep on doing it." So there was a 5K race in the base. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go do this. And I did, and I won it.
Nice.
So
sweet.
So that, and then I did it just for that, right? I did it just, I'm going to be the new guy in this squad, and I'm going to represent this squad and this man, and I'm going to go win this race. So I did. I won it, and I, if I can remember correctly, I was one of the new guys that was allowed to go on a mission. So no other new guy that went with me was going on missions. So it took a while, but I went on a mission. I was with my platoon sergeant, which an awesome guy as well. The dude was just crazy out of his mind, like just insane, right? Short little guy, tough as nails. I mean, the dude was just, he was a wrecking machine, right? So my first deployment, my first mission, I had to shadow him, and he would work through, like, if we had already cleared the building, or we were the secondary to going after the primary assault, like, he would watch me clear the room, and he would go back to my squad leader and say, okay, this guy's good to go, right? So after the first mission, yeah, he cleared me, and I was able to go
after
on
just after one.
What's up?
After just one mission, he said, all right, you're good to go,
man. So I still remember the first time, because my squad was always the primary squad, always, because of our squad leader, right? We were always his primary squad. So I remember the first house we hit, and being the primary squad, and going into my first house, not as a secondary element, but as a primary element, and bangers going off everywhere. Dudes just, it's controlled chaos inside, right? And I just remember going into that threshold and stopping, because it was just like, this is so intense. And then it took one of my buddies to like kick me, to tell me, we have to move, right? And from there on, like, for me, like, doing these missions was like playing a game, right? You don't want to be benched. You want to play the game, right? So that, and I think you brought it up earlier, it becomes like that, right? You want to be the first stringer, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how these missions were, right? And that's kind of the mentality of the guys. You don't, if they have a limited number of guys that they can take because of weight capacity or whatever of the birds or whatever, you don't want to be the guy that's left behind, right? You want to go out, right? You didn't deploy just so you can sit on your butt, right? You want to go out and play that game. So
it sounds like it's like that all the time, every level, whether on deployment, back stateside, there's always this sort of, you're always being evaluated, or ranked in a way so that, there's just, it seems to me, at least, this almost debilitating anxiety of like, well, I got to stay up at the top so that I don't get left behind, or I don't get kicked off. Is that even on deployment?
Yeah,
it's like that.
And so like here's a different dynamic of Ranger Battalion, is that Ranger Battalion does have a shorter selection process. So you do get guys that are potentially 19 years old, right? 19, 20 years old, right?
Damn.
So now you're taking them on missions, and people can argue the level of missions, but I've been on deployments where we've had dev group come and ask us if they could roll out with us, right? So you're taking dudes that are that age on these. It's a tactical mission, but it's got a strategic impact, right? You're doing these pretty high tiered missions, so the amount of control that platoon leadership needs to have in order to make that mission successful, you kind of have to create that environment, right? Where you have to earn your position, because you are dealing with 20-year-olds, 19-year-olds, right? And you're putting them in a position where you're working along guys that are in their late 30s or early 40s that have been doing this for 20 plus years, right? And now you're throwing in a new guy in that mix, right? So you need to come correct.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And gosh, we should all stop for a minute and be thankful that it is that way, right? I mean, because the things that you personally and everybody in Ranger Battalion has done for our safety and for our freedom is we'll never be able to repay. But so I certainly don't mean to suggest any type of negativity, like it's a bad thing that it's that way. It's just fascinating to me, because it's the best. It's among the most elite organizations on the planet when you really sort of think about it, and what makes it that way, is fascinating. And I'm curious, what you've already got, the top 0.01% of essentially of the country of military age males that you could possibly find. You already have gotten sort of that group and put them in Ranger Battalion. And now you're dissecting it even further, even within your own platoon, it sounds like there's still sort of like better guys. What is it that separates, these like your squad leader? What is it that separates these unbelievable leaders, best of the best, from not that they're bad, not that everyone else is a bad leader, but just that maybe not quite where they are at that point? I know that's not an easy question to answer.
I mean, I can answer it. One time, he told me, you always adapt and overcome, right? You always adapt and overcome. Everybody thinks a military, Ranger Battalion, when we do an operations order, it is not, well, I think Tom is going to go do this, and then Bob, are you going to be there? No, it is regimented how we give the op order. Everything is standardized. I mean, it is to the T how we give operations orders, right? So it is completely planned. But you're dealing with humans, so just because it's planned doesn't mean it's going to go that way, right? So I think that saying adapt and overcome is probably what makes someone excel in Ranger Battalion, because I can give you an example. After my second deployment, my squad leader halfway through the deployment left because he went to take the long walk. Right, he went to the CAG selection. And we got a new platoon sergeant. So, and I love this platoon sergeant, right? I mean, now, love the man. And I'll give stories of how we never saw eye to eye, but we found each other on missions multiple times where it's him and I, or he would pick me, right? And, I trusted him with my life, but I just didn't agree with his leadership styles, right? Right. So the dynamic in that platoon changed because we lost what gave that platoon its identity. We lost those guys, right? They either moved on or whatever, but we lost those guys. So the platoon changed, and I didn't like it, the way it was changing. And I didn't want to adapt to the new way, right? I didn't like to be told you need to get a haircut. I didn't like those things, right? I was what you would call a field ranger. Just let me, don't care if my boots or blouse, just let me go do this mission, right? Right. So it was hard for me to adapt to the new identity and the leadership style. But what makes guys successful there, it's being able to adapt to a changing environment and just execute, right?
Right. So adapt and overcome. I like that. Is that something that is you're born with, or is that something that you can learn, do you think?
No, I mean, I don't think. Yeah, I think it's a learned skill. But that's my opinion, right? So now, at what stage in life does that get ingrained?
Sure.
Maybe that plays a role in it, right? So yeah.
But I think that's really insightful and really interesting. So, I mean, so you've already got the elite of the elite, and then sort of what separates, within those elite, what separates the top is maybe their how well or how much they've learned, or sort of where they are in their quest to be able to adapt and overcome, right? That if somebody has learned it, or whether it was born or not, they're really good at being able to adapt and overcome. Those are the ones that tend to be at the elite of the
environments group. Change, right? And you have no control of that environment in changing, right? It could happen in a battlefield, it could happen at work, it could happen at a military school, right? Ranger School is a perfect example of it. Environments change and you cannot control that. If you spend your time dwelling on that, you're not going to be successful. The only thing you can control is how you're going to respond to that changing environment, right? What am I going to do differently to respond to that changing environment, right? I had a plan. Well, that plan, took a turn, but I have to make a decision, right? And not making a decision is making a decision, right? So what can I control that can now affect the outcome of this? Because I can't control what's going on around me, right? That's out of my control. I can't control that. How am I going to respond to that changing in environment? Because the environment sucks, right? In Ranger Battalion, the environment sucks, right? So how am I going to adapt to that environment, right? And still do what I need to do and not focus on that evolution of that environment.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's really, that's also really insightful. And I think that applies in lots of areas of life. That certainly applies to business as well, And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole or get too far off of your journey, but I think that not being able to adapt and overcome when the business environment changes, I think is a big issue. A lot of businesses suffer, or maybe that leaders themselves don't.
I don't think it's business. I think it's leadership.
Get to where they want to go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's really interesting. We'll get back to that in a second. So, look, I could listen to your stories, particularly about deployment, for hours and hours and hours. And I want to be thoughtful and respectful of your time. What was it of your deployments? And I can't even begin to imagine the experiences that you had and the things that you saw on those deployments. But is there anything that you want to share with the audience, or is there anything that you feel like would be impactful or surprising, or that was a big lesson for you on any of your deployments?
To be honest, I enjoyed deployments more than being back home from from a ranger standpoint, right? I liked deployments more because your life was pretty routine, right? Things change sometimes, but you're going to wake up, you're going to work out, and then that night you're going to go on a mission, and you're going to rinse and repeat, right? I enjoyed that environment because typically, you kind of let guys outside of the mission kind of do their own thing, right? You can't really be on top of guys the entire time and then expect them to perform for you on a mission. So I enjoyed that environment as far as what I learned. And I shared this one time when I was doing operations consulting at Waste Management, because a question got brought up, can you work with someone that you don't like, right? And so I bring up my platoon sergeant. So there were two missions in particular that him and I cleared an area together by ourselves, right? And it would happen frequently when him and I would find ourselves. It's rare that a platoon sergeant's going to insert himself, but in the main assault, but sometimes he would. And one time we were clearing this house, and the guys in the house kind of moved to down the hallway, and they moved into a back room. So we had a failed breach. So my platoon sergeant and I went through this window. So it was him and I going through the house first before my squad caught up. And we were working our way through these rooms. And finally, the guys caught us up, and they were about to go into the room where those guys were at. So my platoon sergeant looked at me and he's like, well, we're not going to let those guys in there. Like, it's going to have to be you. Like, he didn't say that, but this is what he meant. We're not going to let our guys go in there. It's going to be you and me that are going to go in that room. Right. And and it was clear. He didn't have to tell me anything. He just looked at me and he nodded at me, and I knew I had to move those guys out of the way. So him and I could go in that room, because that's where all these guys went to. So they went there was because what was in that room that they wanted to. Why did they want to fortify that room, right? So there was a reason why they chose that room. So that's when I learned, that's where what I thought of him completely changed. And that's when I learned, can you trust someone that you don't necessarily see eye to eye? Or can you work with someone that you don't see eye to eye? Well, we just proved it that you can, and we continue to do that, right? There were times when him and I would be in a car together and we wouldn't even talk to each other. But on a mission, we would gravitate towards each other, right?
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, as far as missions or deployments, I enjoyed them. So I mean and I really can't go into like the details of them. Sure. and how things are done.
Absolutely, and I wouldn't want you to. It's there's a lot of people that will never sort of walk a mile in your shoes, for lack of a better term, and I know a lot of people like to hear, as much as they possibly can, to sort of try to put themselves in your shoes, to hear what it was like, which you've done a fantastic job with thus far. And I very much appreciate it. But that was the reason why I asked that question. And sometimes there's folks that there's something that they have on their mind that they want to share about the particular deployment or make sure they want to get out. So I wanted to give you that opportunity. But so toward the end of your career, when you start to decide that you're going to transition out, how was that experience? Was that a difficult thing for you personally?
Yeah, so I actually went to a special missions unit selection, and I can't name that unit, and I cannot go into any details of that unit. We haven't spoken about that unit either, so.
Yes.
So,
well, what can we talk about with regard? What can we talk about with regard to that? Nothing.
So, I mean, I can't tell you anything about that selection, who that unit is, where they're from, anything about that.
Did you have to leave Ranger Battalion?
Yeah. So you have to submit a packet, and there's a whole process that goes into trying out for them, right? They have a huge attrition rate just on guys that apply and don't make it, right? But that, out of everything, I did Best Ranger. I did a lot of things. When I did Best Ranger, my partner and I were, two specialists who ever, placed at a Best Ranger competition, right? With a bunch of dudes that are way more experienced than us, right? And I
actually saw the picture from that.
So
from that competition.
But this selection, man, was the most impactful thing that I've ever been through in my life. I made it through all the way. Things didn't work out. I learned, when I truly say that the night before going to a board, my roommate had already gone, so I was in a room alone, and I just sat there, and I could Monday night quarterback the hell out of it, but at the time, it is what it is. So I just sat in my bed and I just said, God, if you want me there, then I'll be there. But so I mean, I wish I could say more because it was so impactful. Sure. I mean, when I was dropped off, when we were dropped off, we were just told, welcome to Alice in Wonderland. And looking back at it, like, it makes total sense. Like,
interesting.
The amount of adaptability and attention to detail, you have to be perfect. And it's incredible. It was the most impactful thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. I mean, and that kind of, that really ended my military career, because after that, I mean, it was like, there's nothing, there's no one.
Nothing else compares.
Right? But it was enough closure, right? It was enough closure to say, yeah, maybe, that was my limit, right? Maybe,
Wow.
I mean, to be honest, I wasn't, I wasn't good enough, right? That's the honest truth, right? Even though I made it all the way through, I wasn't good enough, right? So it wasn't a reluctant transition. It was, I mean, that's your transition. That's, and I learned a lot of life lessons from that experience, and even from not making it, right? I learned so much from not making that unit.
Did they? So you made it. You made it all the way through selection. Did they tell you? Did they give you any specific feedback, or did they just say, "I'm sorry"?
Yeah,
You have
yeah.
not
I can't
been
go into
chosen.
to how that
Okay.
that happened, but yeah, I mean, yeah,
I got you. And I don't. And in all sincerity, I want to make sure. I don't want to prod or pry where noses should not be by any stretch. But I do appreciate you sharing that with us.
yeah. So that kind of transitioned me out, right? That kind of transitioned.
Gotcha.
Me out. And you know, I could honestly say that I had a, you know, before that, like this. And it's weird. It's kind of weird to think about it this way, but like the global war on terrorism, especially, you know, I'm sure it's in other special operations units as well. But in Ranger Battalion, it's like, you know, every night you're riding in a helicopter and you're going to kick down a door and you're going to pull dudes out of there, right? Where else are you going to get to do that, right? So there is, I would say, some sort of addiction to it, right? Because you're 20 some years old or in your early 30s and you're just, you know, this is how you're rolling around. Like this is your life, right? It's not like any other war that's ever been fought, right? You know, the cool guy. So there is an addiction element to it. But having gone through that really closed that chapter. And I mean, it hurt a lot, right? I mean, it was, you know, flying back home was just, I mean, it was pretty bad flying back home, right? Because I remember, you know, there was one guy there and, you know, we were pretty much done. And he was a candidate as well. And he just said, you know, there was only a few of us. And he said, he's like, there's nothing that this country can't accomplish with the guys that are right here. And you guys are the most humble guys I've ever met, right? And I don't think that everybody's humble. I think that process humbled you, right? Everyone was experiencing the same thing, and that was able to definitely humbled you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Wow.
So,
yeah,
that was. I mean, to this day, super impactful. I mean, it's. I mean, there's not one day that I don't think about it. You know, of really? What I experienced there. Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's incredible.
Wow. Do you say that positively? I mean, when you reflect, what do you? I mean,
yeah. I mean, I'm thankful that I experienced that, because if you're using, you know, the numbers that you use, a 0.01%, bro, this is much smaller than that. You know, I
can't even imagine what it is. I mean,
the amount of guys
we talk about CAG
that have experienced that, you know, I mean, you know, it's a super small amount of guys that have experienced that. And, you know, I'm thankful that I got to experience that. You know, wow. and it was, you know, there were, you know, the last thing my wife told me was kick ass, right? And there were times where it was getting really bad out there, and you know, by myself, just listen, you know, I could hear her voice in my head, kick ass. And, you know, there were days where that's what kept me, you know, going, right? Is her voice saying that. And there were other days where I would tell myself, well, you know, God, if you want me at the next point, then I'm going to get to the next point. If you want me at that point, then I'm going to get to that point. If you don't want me at that point, then I'm not going to get to that point, right? It took me down to that level. Yeah. So the biggest thing is it's like I said, there are certain units out there that I don't know. I mean, what I saw was perfection, right? Like guys just executing things. The way they ran it was perfect, but they're showing you the way we ran it is the way we do things. You know what I mean? Like, there's no flaw in this. You have to be perfect. There's no flaw in it, right? And it's pretty intimidating. You know, it's pretty intimidating.
I mean, I can't even. I mean, my head's spinning right now. Is it? I mean, so is it fair to say that there are some soft units that might get, publicity, or that are looked at in the public eye, or maybe written about a little bit more than others?
I mean,
but that doesn't necessarily indicate sort of where those organizations fall.
But I'm not one of those guys that, the SEALs wrote that book. No, man. I mean, it's a guy that's, sharing his experience, sharing their stories, right? I have nothing against
absolutely
any of that stuff. But yeah, 100%. 100%. There's you mentioned the unit, right? No one, right? What they do, no one has got to touch them, right? So there's definitely hierarchy there.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating for us regular mere mortals, the things that you guys have accomplished and have done, and just the level. And it's just fascinating that the level, like you say, perfection, right? What that looks like, how you get there, what it takes, all that stuff is just, it's just really interesting to me. And I appreciate
the phrase attention.
You share everything.
The phrase attention to detail took a whole nother meaning. Like,
wow.
That took a whole nother meaning, what I learned from that there.
And see, that blows my mind, because coming from somebody that's in Ranger Battalion, to say that is, I can't even really wrap my mind around what that must look like, but that's amazing.
So, transition into the civilian world. I worked as, the official title was business analyst lead, but we were operational consultants for waste management. No background in that at all. But the director just asked me, his interview was very different than any other interview. And he asked, he just asked me questions that really had nothing to do with the job or my knowledge of the industry. It seems like his questions were focused more on your way of being, like the way your approach to people. That was kind of where he was gearing his questions towards, right? So I got picked up, and basically what we're doing is, at the time, waste management went through an organizational transformation, and a lot of these companies always go through these huge initiatives, but the one thing that fails with initiatives is just an initiative, right? It doesn't stick, right? So the philosophy behind this is a sustainability portion, right? And then that's kind of why my director focuses questions on how you approach people, because the three pillars that drove this transformation were technology, processes, but the overarching was mindset, and a lot more focus was put on the mindset aspect of this change, because the mindset essentially gave you an insight: is this operation going to sustain and going to continue, or as soon as we leave, is it going to revert back to what it used to be, right? So he passed away already, but he was another one. He really wanted me to share my experiences, but like I'm not one to like share, my experiences like just like that. So he actually put me in contact. We had to do this whole training with Arbinger. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they're kind of a consulting group out of Utah, I think.
Yeah.
And he put me in contact with one of their main instructors, Chip. And Chip was I think he was a SWAT commander out of Kansas. And at the time, they were having all these issues with their SWAT team, and they put them through this Arbinger thing, this Arbinger training, and it completely reformed their the way they did things in SWAT. It didn't mean they were not going to do things, tactically that they needed to do, but their approach was different, and it led to more arrests. It led to less lawsuits and stuff like that. So he and then this guy Chip was able to, and he gives a lot of talks on YouTube and all that stuff. So Chip was able to give his experience as a SWAT commander, like nothing, right? Even if it involved taking someone's life, right? He was able to give that story and not have the audience look at, oh, well, you took someone's life, right? The way his delivery was excellent. So Scott put me in contact with Chip, and kind of Chip, he helped me out a lot on how to share experiences and to use them as analogies for the change that you're trying to drive at the organizational level. So, I was in charge of Northern and Southern California. They're the two biggest market areas that Waste Management has. And, I was able to help secure Alameda County, one of the largest municipal contracts that Waste Management has. And you have to understand, Waste Management is one of the largest hauling companies. Their municipal contracts are massive contracts for 10-year contracts, right? So at the time, this was the largest contract that Waste Management had ever earned. And
wow.
A lot of it did have to do with some of the processes that I was able to implement that drove up their efficiency and drove down their operating cost, so they could come to the table at a better rate and still make money off of that rate.
Gotcha. That's incredible. Is it your experience that a lot of what you learned in the military is applicable in the world of business in terms of like mindset?
100%, teams? Right. Right now I just transitioned into a project management role, and I'm leading a project, information management project, right? And I drew up the schedule, and right now it looks like there's going to be some hiccups in the schedule, right? And just before coming on, based on these hiccups that I have no control over, how am I going to reevaluate and still meet these deliverables, right? And a lot of times, even in my experience, I've seen it a lot of times. A lot of people get set into these schedules, right? And anything deviates from it, and are we deviating from the schedule? Well, yes, we are. And it's a complete catastrophic. Well, so yeah, I think a lot of people, in my experience, sometimes have a challenge with accepting change and how to adapt to that change when it doesn't go your way, right? It goes back to adapt and overcome, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think the military definitely helped me do that, because I could, when I was in Ranger School, you're dealing with dudes that are hungry and that haven't slept in weeks, right? And now you're trying to lead them on a mission. When you're talking to them, it's like a zombie looking back at you. They have no clue what you're telling them, but now you're trying to like brief them on this complex mission, and you're thinking, how the hell are we going to accomplish this? This guy can't even, he can't even stand up, and now we're going to accomplish this mission, right? So, like, a lot of people obviously aren't going to experience that, but if you wanted to graduate, well, I have to find a way to get these dudes to do what I need them to do in order for us to accomplish this mission, right? And if they fall asleep, everyone's going to fall asleep. So how can I get them there, right? I think a lot of people get set on how things are supposed to be and are reluctant to adapt to how things really are.
Gosh, yeah, we need to shout that from the rooftops. I think that's unbelievable wisdom. And people just, when things don't go as expected, they don't know. Or I probably should say like I'm some special person that this doesn't impact. It impacts me as well.
Yeah.
When things don't go as we think, it's like, oh gosh, what do we do? So you have some unbelievable world-class training that helps you with that. Well, are there certain things that you've noticed? Just one or two more questions and then I'll let you go. I really appreciate how much time you've given me. Are there a couple of things sort of in the civilian life or in business that that have surprised you or that irritate you or kind of drive you crazy after having accomplished everything that you have on the military side? You're like, I can't believe these people. I can't believe this business is successful when they do this or they do that. Anything that sort of jumps out at you?
Yeah. I'm kind of results oriented driven, right? To me, sometimes, I don't like to be patted on the back, and at the same time, civilians do like to be patted on the back, right? And I've learned that you've got to celebrate their accomplishments, right? So I've learned how to deal with that, and the one thing I always criticize is when they say we're gonna do a team building exercise, and then I think back to what General McChrystal talks about, and I'm like, you have no idea like what a team building exercise really is. Like, you have no clue what brings, I don't want to, what brings men together, right? Because I've experienced that, right? I've experienced where, especially in Best Ranger, where I had to rely on my partner at certain times when I thought I wasn't going to make it through the night. That is a team building exercise. One of the things in the military that brings men together is how vulgar the environment is, but it's necessary, right? It has to happen because that builds trust amongst men. And if that doesn't happen, then the consequences are going to be highlighted on a mission. So when you're back, you're having these conversations that a regular civilian walks in and go like, you're like, are these animals talking, right? No, it's not. It's men building trust amongst each other, right? And that needs to happen, right? So obviously you get numb to things, and that's not the case in the civilian world, right? So I had to kind of adjust to that. And
those are really, really, really interesting examples. I appreciate you sharing that. I appreciate you sharing that. Well, so I've got one last question that I ask all of our guests, and it's a little bit of a depressing question. So God willing, something like this never happens. But if if your house, something were to happen, your house were to catch on fire, and you had a chance to run in and grab one thing before the fire overtook everything, what is it that you would grab?
Besides my family?
Yes. Yeah. Good. Yes. Pets, humans and pets are all safe. It's just one non-living thing.
Non-living thing. Can I show it to you or no?
Yeah, I would love that. That'd be great. Please.
I would grab this.
So that's a
so this
crucifix with Christ.
But so that's I mean,
very meaningful to you, I suppose. Yeah. And we can leave it at that.
So that's what I would grab. Yeah.
I love it. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that too, because that tends to kind of bring things home, and I've got a lot of interesting answers to that. Some people have said their computer. Some people have mementos and things that remind them of other people. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And I did not expect us to go this long. I genuinely, your story is amazing, man. And I really appreciate you sharing it. And I'd like to, I want to get it out there to a whole bunch of people so that they can learn from everything that you've done. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I thank you for, bearing with me, spending time and answering my questions.
Thank you, man.
Don't forget, everybody, you can find Boundary Breakers in a lot of places. You can watch our episodes on the Boundary Breakers YouTube channel, or you can listen to each podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of the other major podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.